classroom fell into one of those rare, perfect silences, the kind where 23 children actually focused on the science experiment unfolding before them. Mrs. Elena Hartfield stood at the front of the room, a beaker of blue liquid in one hand, explaining how molecules change state when heated. She'd been teaching 6th grade for 17 years, long enough to recognize when a lesson truly landed, when young minds weren't just hearing words but actually understanding them. Then she saw it, or rather she saw him. Marcus Sullivan, seated in the 3rd row by the window, shifted in his chair for perhaps the dozenth time that morning, but this time the movement came with something else. A brief flash of pain across his face, quickly smoothed away into practiced neutrality. The kind of expression that suggested he'd learned to hide discomfort so well, it had become automatic. Elena's hand froze mid-demonstration. The beaker hovered in the air, forgotten. For 3 full seconds she simply stared, her mind racing through possibilities, discarding explanations, landing nowhere comfortable. Then the moment passed. She completed the demonstration, answered questions, assigned the day's reading. But something had shifted. Something she couldn't quite name yet, couldn't quite see, but could absolutely feel. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy educational stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. Riverside Elementary sat in one of those neighborhoods where people still left their doors unlocked, where children rode bikes until the streetlights came on, where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. The school itself was a source of community pride, updated facilities, consistently high test scores, a waiting list for enrollment. Parents competed for spots here. Teachers stayed for decades. Nothing bad happened at Riverside Elementary. Elena had arrived here fresh out of college, idealistic and terrified, convinced she'd either change the world or collapse under the weight of responsibility. 17 years later, she occupied a middle ground, realistic about her limitations, proud of her small victories, deeply committed to the 200 or so students who passed through her classroom each year. She knew their learning styles, their friendship dramas, their favorite books. She knew which ones needed extra encouragement and which ones needed gentle reining in. She knew her job, and she was good at it. Marcus Sullivan had been in her class since September. It was now late October, and Elena realized with a start that she knew almost nothing about him. He wasn't disruptive, so he didn't draw disciplinary attention. He wasn't struggling academically, so he didn't require intervention. He wasn't particularly social, but he wasn't isolated either. He had a small group of friends, boys who played basketball during recess and traded comics during lunch. He was, in every measurable way, fine. Except he wasn't. Elena understood that now, watching him gather his books as the lunch bell rang. He moved carefully, deliberately, like someone twice his age navigating an injury they'd learned to work around. When he bent to retrieve a dropped pencil, he did so from the knees, keeping his back rigidly straight. When another student accidentally bumped his desk, Marcus's jaw clenched for just a moment before relaxing. Small things, tiny things, the kind of things you could miss if you weren't looking, the kind of things Elena had apparently been missing for weeks. The cafeteria smelled like industrial pizza, and whatever vegetable the district nutritionist had decided was both affordable and technically food. Elena usually spent lunch in her classroom, grading papers or preparing lessons, but today she found herself walking between the tables, ostensibly supervising but really watching Marcus. He sat with his usual group, 4 other boys, all absorbed in an animated discussion about some video game Elena didn't recognize. Marcus participated, laughed at the right moments, seemed completely engaged. But he didn't lean back in his chair like the others did. He didn't slouch or sprawl or claim space the way 11-year-old boys typically did. He perched on the edge of his seat, weight forward, leaving his back unsupported. Mrs. Hartfield, one of the lunch monitors, Susan Chen, appeared at her elbow. "Everything okay? You look worried." Elena forced a smile. "Just tired. Long morning." "Tell me about it. I had 3 spills before first period even ended." Susan launched into a story about a dropped tray and a spectacular milk explosion, but Elena barely heard her. She was watching Marcus stand up, watching him gather his tray with the same careful, controlled movements. Watching him walk toward the trash bins without the loose, careless energy that should define a 6th grader's every movement. She was probably overreacting. She was probably seeing problems where none existed. Probably. That afternoon's math lesson felt endless. Elena heard herself teaching, something about fractions and common denominators, but her attention kept drifting to the 3rd row, to the boy who sat so carefully, who moved so precisely, who seemed to be holding himself together through sheer force of will. When the dismissal bell finally rang, Elena made a decision. "Marcus, could you stay back for just a moment?" The other students filed out in their usual chaotic rush, backpacks swinging, voices overlapping, the peculiar energy of children released from obligation. Marcus approached her desk slowly. His expression neutral, but his shoulders tight with tension. "Am I in trouble, Mrs. Hartfield?" "No, honey, nothing like that." Elena kept her voice gentle, casual. "I just wanted to check in. Make sure everything's okay." "Everything's fine. You've seemed a little uncomfortable lately, like maybe you're not feeling well." Marcus's face went very still. "I'm fine. Can I go? My mom's probably waiting." Elena wanted to push. Every instinct she'd developed over 17 years of teaching screamed at her to push. But she also knew that pushing too hard, too fast, could shut down communication entirely. So she smiled and nodded. "Of course. See you tomorrow." He left quickly, relief evident in the speed of his departure. Elena sat at her desk long after the last footsteps faded from the hallway, staring at nothing, thinking about everything. That evening, she couldn't let it go. Over a dinner she barely tasted, she mentally catalogued every interaction with Marcus over the past 2 months. The way he'd stopped participating in gym class, claiming stomach problems or forgotten equipment. The way he always wore his uniform shirt untucked, even though the dress code called for tucked shirts. The way he never seemed to fully relax, never seemed truly comfortable in his own body. Her husband, David, noticed her distraction. "You're somewhere else tonight." "Just a student. Something feels off." "Off how?" Elena struggled to articulate it. "Like he's in pain but hiding it. Or maybe I'm imagining things. Maybe I've been doing this so long I'm seeing problems everywhere." "Your instincts are usually good," David said carefully. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. Keep watching, I guess. Document what I see. Try to figure out if there's really something wrong or if I'm just creating problems where none exist," David finished. "You're not. If something feels wrong, it probably is." The next morning, Elena arrived at school early. She reviewed Marcus's file, standardized test scores, attendance records, previous teachers' notes. Everything painted a picture of an average, unremarkable student. No red flags, no concerns, nothing to worry about. She pulled out a notebook and started a new page, dated it, wrote Marcus's name at the top. Then she began documenting everything she'd noticed: the posture, the careful movements, the avoidance of certain activities. When she finished, she stared at the list, unsure whether it represented genuine concern or paranoid overreach. The morning passed in normal rhythms. English, social studies, a brief recess where Elena stood near the basketball courts, watching Marcus stand on the sidelines while his friends played. He'd claimed a twisted ankle, but Elena noticed he put equal weight on both feet when he walked. The ankle wasn't the problem. During art class, the one period where another teacher took over while Elena had planning time, she found herself walking past the art room door, glancing through the small window. Marcus sat at his table, working on some kind of collage project, but his chair was positioned strangely, angled so he could lean against the table edge rather than the chair back. Sarah Martinez, the art teacher, stepped into the hallway. "Looking for someone?" "Just checking on things," Elena said quickly. Too quickly. Sarah studied her with the kind of knowing look one teacher gives another when they recognize shared concern. "The Sullivan boy. He's been moving carefully all period. I asked if he felt okay. He said he was fine. He always says he's fine." "Yeah." Sarah crossed her arms. "So did Jenny Crawford last year, remember? Right up until the counselor noticed the bruises." The reference hit Elena like cold water. Jenny Crawford's situation had been different. Visible marks, documented behavioral changes, multiple red flags. But Sarah's point stood. Children, especially children in difficult situations, learn to hide. They learn to say fine when nothing was fine at all. They learn to be invisible. "I'm keeping an eye on it," Elena said. "Good. Let me know if you need anything." By Thursday of that week, Elena's notebook had grown to 3 pages. Thursday morning. Marcus arrived 7 minutes late, unusual for him. His uniform shirt was wrinkled, hastily tucked. He avoided eye contact with Elena and moved to his seat with even more care than usual. During silent reading, she watched him attempt 3 different sitting positions before settling on perching sideways. His weight shifted entirely onto his left hip. Thursday afternoon. During a group project, Marcus volunteered to be the note-taker rather than participate in the hands-on construction portion. When Elena asked why, he mumbled something about wanting to practice his handwriting. His handwriting, she noted, was nearly illegible that day, shaky, uneven, nothing like his usual careful script. Friday morning, Marcus asked to be excused to the nurse's office. When Elena called down an hour later to check on him, Nurse Patricia said he'd complained of dizziness, rested for 20 minutes, then insisted he felt better. Patricia's tone suggested she didn't quite believe him, but had no medical reason to keep him. Friday afternoon. During dismissal, Elena watched Marcus's mother pick him up. Catherine Sullivan looked exactly like she always did. Professional blazer, hurried smile, phone pressed to her ear. She didn't seem to notice how carefully her son lowered himself into the car, didn't seem to see the way he bit his lip against discomfort. Or maybe she saw and didn't want to see. Elena had learned that parents were capable of remarkable blindness when it came to their own children. That weekend stretched impossibly long. Elena found herself thinking about Marcus during grocery shopping, during a movie with David, during Sunday morning coffee. She kept returning to one central question. What if she was wrong? What if she raised concerns, launched investigations, disrupted a family's life? All because a kid had bad posture and she'd let her imagination run wild. But another question haunted her even more. What if she was right and did nothing? Monday arrived with rain hammering against the classroom windows, the kind of gray, miserable day that made everyone irritable and restless. Elena's students filed in shaking water from their coats, complaining about the weather, tracking mud across the floor she'd just cleaned. Marcus was among the last to arrive, moving with his now familiar caution, and Elena made her decision. She waited until lunch, then walked to the main office. Principal Richard Morrison sat behind his desk, working through paperwork with the grim determination of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. He looked up when Elena knocked, his expression shifting from annoyed to concerned when he registered her face. "Elena, what's wrong?" She closed the door behind her. I need to talk to you about a student, Marcus Sullivan. For the next 15 minutes, she laid out everything she'd observed and documented. Richard listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as she spoke. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. "These are concerning observations," he said finally. "But Elena, you know we have to be careful here. We can't make accusations without evidence. We can't violate a family's privacy on a hunch." "I know that. And you also know that kids Marcus's age can be awkward, can have growing pains, can go through phases where they're uncomfortable in their bodies." "This isn't that." Elena heard the certainty in her own voice. "Richard, I've been teaching long enough to know the difference between normal growing pains and something else. This is something else." Richard drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking, "What are you proposing?" "I want to do a wellness check. Nothing invasive, nothing that would traumatize him. Just a basic check to make sure he's not injured or in distress." "With another staff member present," Richard said immediately, "and you'd need to document everything. If you find something concerning, we follow protocol, medical evaluation. Call to Child Protective Services if warranted." "I understand. And Elena?" Richard met her eyes. "If you don't find anything, if this turns out to be nothing, you have to let it go. We can't have teachers constantly pulling students aside based on gut feelings. Do you understand what I'm saying?" She understood. She understood that her reputation, her judgment, her credibility all balanced on what happened next. She understood that she was potentially wrong and potentially about to make everything worse, but she also understood that she wouldn't, look away. "I understand." "Okay." Richard picked up his phone. "I'll have Patricia come up. She's trained in recognizing signs of abuse and neglect. You two can do the check together during afternoon recess. Document everything. And Elena?" "I hope you're wrong." "Me too," Elena said, and meant it. The next 3 hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Elena taught lessons she barely remembered teaching, responded to questions on autopilot, watched the clock as if staring could make time move faster. Her students sensed her distraction and grew correspondingly restless. By the time recess arrived, the classroom energy had deteriorated into barely controlled chaos. "Okay, everybody out for recess," she announced, grateful for the break. "Marcus, could you stay behind for just a minute?" The other students thundered toward the door, already arguing about teams and games and who got to use which equipment. Marcus remained at his desk, his face carefully blank, but Elena saw the fear flash in his eyes before he locked it away. Nurse Patricia arrived moments later, carrying a small medical bag. She was in her 50s, efficient and kind, with 30 years of school nursing experience. She'd seen everything, and her presence immediately made the situation feel more real, more serious. "Hi, Marcus," Patricia said warmly. "Mrs. Hartfield mentioned you've seemed uncomfortable lately. We just want to make sure you're not dealing with an injury or illness that needs attention. Is that okay?" Marcus's throat worked as he swallowed. "I'm fine." "I'm sure you are," Patricia said, still friendly but firm. "But let's make sure, okay? We're going to do a quick physical check, nothing invasive. Mrs. Hartfield will be here the whole time. You're not in any trouble and you haven't done anything wrong. We just want to help if you're hurting." Elena watched Marcus war with himself. Part of him wanted to run. She could see it in the tension of his legs, the angle of his body toward the door. But another part, maybe a part that was tired of hiding and hurting, seemed to deflate slightly. He nodded once, barely perceptible. "Okay," Patricia said. "Let's start simple. Can you stand up for me?" Marcus stood, his movements careful and controlled. "Can you touch your toes?" He bent forward from the waist, barely making it halfway down before stopping with a sharp intake of breath. "Does that hurt?" Patricia asked. A little, Marcus admitted, and Elena's heart clenched at the confession. A little, as if pain had become so normal he barely registered it anymore. Okay, can you lift your arms over your head? He did, but Elena noticed how he grimaced when his shirt pulled against his back. Patricia and Elena exchanged a look. Patricia set down her bag and spoke gently. Marcus, I need to check your back. Is that okay? I'm just going to lift your shirt slightly to see if there's any redness or swelling. Mrs. Hartfield will be right here. No. The word came out sharp, panicked. No, I'm fine. I don't need... Marcus. Elena moved closer, careful not to crowd him. Sweetheart, if you're hurt, we need to know. We need to help. Whatever it is, whatever happened, it's not your fault. Nothing happened. I fell. A few weeks ago. I fell off my bike and it's just taking a while to heal, that's all. If you fell off your bike, there should be bruising, Patricia said. Scrapes, maybe. Let's take a look and make sure it's healing properly. Sometimes injuries that seem minor can actually need medical attention. Marcus looked between them, trapped. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, Elena thought he might bolt anyway, might run straight out the door and force them to chase him down the hallway. Instead, he closed his eyes and nodded once. Patricia moved with professional efficiency but visible compassion. She stepped behind Marcus and gently grasped the hem of his uniform shirt. I'm going to lift this up slowly, okay? Tell me if anything hurts. She lifted the shirt 6 inches, revealing the small of Marcus's back. Then 12 inches, revealing his lower back, then higher. And then she stopped. Elena heard Patricia's sharp intake of breath, saw her face drain of color. Patricia held the shirt suspended, frozen in place, and for 3 eternal seconds nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody spoke. Elena stepped closer, looked over Patricia's shoulder, and felt the world tilt. Marcus's back was a canvas of injuries in various stages of healing. Fresh bruises, purple and angry, overlapped with older ones fading to yellow-green. Welts crisscrossed his skin in parallel lines, some scabbed over, some still raw. In several places the skin was broken, weeping slightly through what looked like crude bandaging. The pattern was unmistakable, methodical. This wasn't a fall from a bike. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Elena's training kicked in even as her mind reeled. Document. Stay calm. Don't contaminate the evidence. Don't traumatize the child further. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and began taking photographs, each click of the camera shutter sounding impossibly loud in the silent room. Patricia lowered Marcus's shirt with infinite gentleness. Her voice, when she spoke, was remarkably steady. Marcus, honey, who did this to you? He didn't answer. He stood with his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the floor, his whole body radiating shame and fear in equal measure. Marcus. Elena moved to stand in front of him, lowering herself to his eye level. Look at me, sweetheart. He did, reluctantly, and she saw tears gathering in his eyes, even as he fought to hold them back. You are not in trouble, Elena said, infusing every word with certainty. You have done nothing wrong. Nothing. Do you understand me? Whatever happened, whoever did this, it is not your fault. The first tear spilled over, tracking down his cheek. You can't tell, please. If you tell, it'll get worse. It always gets worse. Patricia was already on her phone, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone. Richard. Probably, or possibly emergency services directly. Elena stayed focused on Marcus, on keeping him calm, on making him understand that the nightmare was ending, not escalating. Marcus, listen to me. Elena took his hands in hers, feeling how cold they were, how they trembled. I know you're scared. I know you think telling will make things worse, but staying silent isn't keeping you safe. It's keeping you hurt. We're going to protect you now. That's our job. That's what adults are supposed to do." "You don't understand." His voice cracked, and suddenly he wasn't an 11-year-old trying to seem older and tougher. He was a child, small and frightened and desperate. "My dad, he doesn't mean it. He just gets angry sometimes. He's stressed about work and money and everything, and I know I shouldn't make him mad. But I do stupid things and—" "No." Elena's voice came out sharper than she intended. She softened it immediately. "No, Marcus. Nothing you could do, nothing you could say, nothing you could be justifies this. Adults don't get to hurt children because they're stressed. They don't get to hurt children at all. Ever." Patricia ended her call and knelt beside them. "Marcus, an ambulance is coming. We need to get you to the hospital so doctors can examine these injuries and make sure you're okay. Mrs. Hartfield or I will stay with you the whole time. You won't be alone. What about my mom?" Fresh panic flooded his face. "Does she have to know? She'll be so upset. She'll think it's her fault for working late so much. She doesn't know. She travels for work, and it only happens when she's gone. And if she finds out—" Elena and Patricia exchanged another look, this one heavy with shared understanding. Catherine Sullivan didn't know. Or perhaps more accurately, Catherine Sullivan had successfully convinced herself she didn't know. It was amazing the things people could not see when seeing would require action, would require upheaval, would require choosing their child's safety over their own comfort or stability. "Your mom loves you," Elena said, hoping it was true, believing it had to be true on some level. "And she'll want you safe, even if it's hard for her. Right now, we need to focus on you." The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Marcus sat in Elena's desk chair, Patricia monitoring him clinically while Elena stayed close, offering silent support. Richard appeared at some point, his face grim, and spoke quietly with Patricia near the door. Elena caught fragments. CPS notified, police involvement, statement from the child, and understood that the machinery of protection had begun grinding into motion. 2 paramedics entered with practiced calm, a woman and a man who introduced themselves and immediately began assessing Marcus. They were gentle but thorough, asking questions in low voices, examining without touching more than necessary. When one of them carefully lifted Marcus's shirt again to photograph the injuries more extensively, Elena saw him flinch and made herself keep watching. Someone needed to be a witness. Someone needed to acknowledge what had been done to him. "We're going to transport you to County General," the female paramedic said. "The pediatric team there specializes in cases like yours. They'll examine you fully, treat any injuries that need immediate attention, and document everything. A social worker will meet us there. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded mutely. "Can I come?" Elena heard herself ask. "Would that help?" Marcus looked at her with something like desperation. "Please." "I'll follow in my car," Elena said. "I'll be there as soon as you arrive." She watched them load Marcus onto a gurney, unnecessary from a medical standpoint, but protocol for transporting minors in potential abuse cases, and wheel him out of her classroom. The space felt wrong in his absence, contaminated by what had been revealed within its walls. The desks sat in neat rows as if this were a normal Monday, as if everything hadn't just shattered. Richard touched her shoulder. "Elena, you did the right thing." "Then why do I feel sick?" "Because you're human, because this is sickening." He paused. "Take the rest of the day. Hell, take tomorrow if you need to. I'll get a substitute." "No." Elena grabbed her purse, her keys, her phone. "I need to be there for him. I'll be back tomorrow." The drive to County General blurred past. Elena barely remembered the route, barely registered traffic lights or turns. Her mind kept replaying the moment she'd seen Marcus's back, kept cataloging injuries, kept wondering how many times he'd been hurt, how many times he'd hidden it, How many times he'd come to school smiling and participating and pretending everything was fine. How many times had she failed to notice? The emergency room was chaos, as emergency rooms always were, people bleeding and coughing and crying. Staff moving with urgent efficiency, the peculiar smell of antiseptic and fear. Elena gave Marcus's name at the desk and was directed to a waiting area. A police officer stood nearby, young and serious-looking, and intercepted her as she approached. "You're the teacher, Mrs. Hartfield?" "Yes." "Detective Sarah Chen, Child Abuse Unit." The woman extended a hand. "I'll need to get a statement from you about what you observed and when. But first, I wanted to thank you. A lot of adults see signs and convince themselves they're imagining things. You didn't." Elena shook her hand, unsure how to respond to gratitude for something that felt like basic human decency. Is Marcus okay?" "He's being examined now. Physically, the injuries look worse than they are, mostly superficial bruising and lacerations, nothing that won't heal. Psychologically," Detective Chen shook her head, "that's going to take longer. But he's safe now. That's what matters. What happens next? We're in the process of obtaining a warrant for the father's arrest. Based on Marcus's statement and the physical evidence, we have more than enough for charges. The mother is being contacted. She's apparently on a business trip in Dallas. Once she's back, there'll be decisions to make about Marcus's custody, whether he goes into foster care temporarily or whether she can provide a safe environment." Elena wanted to say something sharp about Catherine Sullivan's capability to provide safety, about her convenient absences and willful blindness. But she bit it back. She didn't know the full situation. She didn't know what Catherine had or hadn't known, what she'd suspected or denied or simply missed, because people were frighteningly good at hiding the truth. "Can I see him?" "Once the medical exam is complete, they should be wrapping up soon." 40 minutes later, Elena sat in a hospital room with Marcus. He wore a hospital gown, his back newly bandaged, and looked impossibly small against the white sheets. An IV drip provided fluids and antibiotics. Apparently, some of the wounds had shown early signs of infection. His face was puffy from crying, but he'd composed himself into fragile calm. "Mrs. Hartfield?" His voice was tiny. "Am I going to have to testify, like, in court?" "I don't know, honey. Maybe. But there are lots of people whose job is to make that as easy as possible for you. Child advocates, counselors, people trained to help kids through this process." "I don't want to see him." Marcus's hands fisted in the sheets. "My dad. I don't want to have to see him and talk about what he did." "You might not have to. A lot of these cases are resolved without trial. But Marcus..." Elena chose her words carefully. "If you do have to testify, if you do have to tell what happened, that's not a bad thing. That's you being brave. That's you making sure this doesn't happen to you or anyone else again." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "How long have you known that something was wrong?" Elena felt the question like an indictment. "Not long enough. A couple of weeks, maybe. I should have noticed sooner. I tried really hard to hide it. I know you did. You did too good a job." She reached out, then paused. "Can I hold your hand?" He nodded, and she took his hand gently, careful not to jostle the IV. His fingers were cold and small in hers. "Marcus, I need you to understand something. This was not your job. Hiding abuse, protecting your father, keeping the family together. None of that was ever your responsibility. You're a child. Children are supposed to be protected, not the ones doing the protecting. But my mom... Your mom is an adult. Whatever happens between your parents, whatever fallout comes from this, that's not on you. That's on your father for what he did, and on your mother for..." Elena caught herself. "For whatever role she played or didn't play. But it's not on you." A social worker arrived then, a woman named Janet, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She carried a clipboard and wore an expression that suggested she'd seen far too much of what humanity was capable of inflicting on its most vulnerable members. She spoke with Marcus for a few minutes, explaining what would happen next. Temporary foster placement unless his mother could provide documentation of a safe environment, ongoing therapy, regular check-ins with Child Protective Services. Marcus listened with the glazed expression of someone overwhelmed by information, and Elena felt a surge of protective fury at the unfairness of it all. He should be worrying about math homework and video games, and whether the girl he liked noticed him. Instead, he was navigating the machinery of child welfare, dissecting his family's darkest secrets for strangers, trying to understand how his life had imploded in a single afternoon. Elena stayed until Catherine Sullivan arrived 4 hours later. She burst into the hospital room like a hurricane, all expensive perfume and barely controlled panic, and went straight to Marcus with a mother's instinctive need to touch, to verify her child's existence and safety. But Marcus flinched when she reached for him, and Catherine's hands froze in midair. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Did she? Didn't she? Elena studied Catherine's face and honestly couldn't tell. Maybe she'd truly been oblivious, absorbed in work and travel and the surface appearance of family functionality. Maybe she'd suspected but convinced herself she was wrong. Maybe she'd known but felt powerless to act. The truth was probably some complicated combination of all three, and Elena found she didn't have the energy to judge. "Mrs. Sullivan," Detective Chen appeared in the doorway. "We need to speak with you about next steps. There are decisions that need to be made regarding Marcus's immediate custody." Catherine looked between her son and the detective, and Elena saw the moment she understood that nothing would ever be simple again. Her marriage was over. Her family was shattered. Her son's childhood had been stolen, and somewhere in the wreckage of all that loss, she'd have to find a way to be the parent Marcus needed, the parent she perhaps hadn't been when it mattered most. Elena slipped out of the room, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and finally let herself cry, quiet tears that came from a place of rage and sorrow and relief, all tangled together. Detective Chen found her there 10 minutes later, still composing herself. The detective handed her a tissue without comment, professional enough to recognize that witnesses needed their own moments to process trauma, even second-hand trauma. "You should go home," Chen said gently. "Get some rest. We have everything we need from you for now. I'll be in touch if we need additional statements." Elena nodded, wiping her eyes. "What happens to him tonight?" "Emergency foster placement with a family trained in handling trauma cases. It's not ideal, but Mrs. Sullivan needs time to secure housing away from the father, to demonstrate she can provide safety. CPS doesn't place kids back in homes where abusers have access, even if protective orders are filed. She'll have to prove the environment is secure." "And the father?" "Officers are en route to the residence now. He'll be arrested, charged with multiple counts of child abuse. Given the photographic evidence and Marcus's testimony, the case is solid. He'll likely take a plea deal rather than go to trial." Chen's expression hardened. "People like Thomas Sullivan usually do. They're brave enough to beat children, but cowards when facing consequences." Elena thought about Marcus going to sleep that night in a stranger's home, surrounded by unfamiliar walls and voices, probably terrified and certainly confused. She thought about him waking up tomorrow and remembering all over again that his life had changed irrevocably. She thought about the long road ahead of him, therapy sessions and court dates, and the slow, painful work of healing from wounds that went far deeper than the ones visible on his back. "Will he be okay?" she asked, knowing it was an impossible question. "Eventually? Maybe. With time and help and people who care, Yes, probably. Chen studied her. You gave him something important today, Mrs. Hartfield. You gave him the message that adults can be trusted to protect him. That might not seem like much right now, but it's everything. It's the foundation he'll build his recovery on. Elena drove home as darkness fell, the city lights blurring past in streaks of gold and white. David met her at the door, took one look at her face, and pulled her into his arms without a word. She stood there in the entryway, still wearing her coat, and let him hold her while she shook with belated shock. I saw his back, she whispered into David's shoulder. It was so much worse than I imagined, and he's been coming to school every day, sitting through lessons, pretending everything was normal. How does a child do that? How does anyone do that? Because he had to, David said, because kids are resilient in ways they should never have to be. But you stopped it, Elena. You saw what was happening and you stopped it. I almost didn't. I almost convinced myself I was overreacting. But you didn't. That's what matters. That night, Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind refusing to quiet. She kept replaying moments from the past 2 months, seeing them now through the lens of understanding. Marcus standing aside during recess, not because he didn't want to play, but because he couldn't risk the physical contact. Marcus flinching when she touched his shoulder to get his attention during a lesson. Marcus's careful, controlled movements that she'd initially dismissed as awkwardness. The signs had been there. She'd seen them. But she'd almost looked away. Tuesday morning came too soon. Elena arrived at school to find Richard waiting in her classroom, along with a district counselor named Dr. Pamela Rodriguez. The counselor was there to talk to Marcus's classmates, Richard explained, to help them process what had happened without violating Marcus's privacy or turning the situation into gossip. Some of them already know, Richard said. Small school, word travels. We need to get ahead of the narrative before rumors spiral. Elena sat through the counselor's session feeling disconnected from her own body. Dr. Rodriguez was skilled and compassionate, explaining in age-appropriate terms that sometimes adults hurt children, that it was never the child's fault, that there were people and systems designed to help when these situations came to light. The students asked questions, some innocent, some surprisingly perceptive, and Dr. Rodriguez answered them all with patience. "Is Marcus coming back?" asked Lily Chen, one of Marcus's friends. "That depends on a lot of factors," Dr. Rodriguez said. "Right now, Marcus is safe and getting help. Whether he returns to this school or transitions somewhere else will depend on what's best for him and his family situation." Elena hoped he'd come back. She hoped he'd have the chance to reclaim this space, to have normal experiences with friends who knew him as more than a victim, to rebuild his life from a foundation of familiarity. But she also understood if he didn't. Sometimes starting over in a new place was easier than trying to resume a life that had been interrupted by trauma. The following weeks passed in a strange rhythm of normal and not normal. Elena taught her lessons, graded papers, managed the small dramas and celebrations of 6th grade life. But part of her attention remained fixed on Marcus, on updates from Detective Chen and the social worker, on the slowly unfolding resolution of his case. Thomas Sullivan was arrested and charged with 7 counts of child abuse. The evidence was overwhelming. Photographs, medical records, Marcus's testimony, even some text messages between Thomas and Catherine, where he'd referenced disciplining Marcus in ways that clearly crossed legal and moral lines. He accepted a plea deal, 8 years in prison, mandatory counseling, permanent restraining order preventing contact with Marcus. 8 years. Elena couldn't decide if it felt like enough or nowhere near enough. Could any prison sentence balance against a childhood stolen, against trust shattered, against scars both visible and invisible? Catherine Sullivan filed for divorce immediately. She found an apartment across town, far from the house where the abuse had occurred. She enrolled in parenting classes and therapy. She fought the CPS case with the desperation of someone trying to undo months or years of failure in a matter of weeks. And slowly, incrementally, she won back supervised visits with her son, then unsupervised visits, then weekend custody. 3 months after the initial discovery, Marcus returned to Riverside Elementary. Elena saw him first from her classroom window during morning arrival. He climbed out of his mother's car with visible hesitation, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his expression wary. Catherine said something to him, probably encouragement or reassurance, and he nodded before heading toward the building. When he appeared in her classroom doorway, Elena felt her throat tighten with emotion. He looked different somehow, not physically, but in the way he carried himself. The rigid control was gone, replaced by something more natural, but also more tentative, as if he was learning how to inhabit his body all over again. "Hi, Marcus," she said, keeping her voice normal, casual. "Welcome back. Your seat's still available, or you can pick a new one if you prefer." He chose a different seat, she noticed, away from the window, closer to the front, positioned where he could see both the door and the room. Trauma-informed positioning, probably something his therapist had worked on with him. The other students welcomed him back with varying degrees of enthusiasm and awkwardness, and gradually the morning settled into familiar patterns. At lunch, Elena found Marcus sitting with his usual group of friends, though the dynamic had shifted slightly. They were gentler with him now, more careful, but also clearly committed to treating him normally. She heard them discussing some movie they all wanted to see, making plans for someone's birthday party, arguing about basketball statistics. Normal 6th grade conversation. Beautiful in its normalcy. "Mrs. Hartfield?" Marcus approached her desk after school, after the other students had left. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course, sit down." He sat and for a moment simply looked at her. Then, "Thank you for noticing, for not looking away." Elena felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. "You don't have to thank me for doing what any adult should do." "But a lot of adults don't. My mom didn't. My aunt and uncle who saw me at Christmas didn't. The neighbors who probably heard things didn't." His voice was matter-of-fact, not accusatory, just stating observable truth. "You did. So thank you." "How are you doing?" Elena asked. "Really doing?" Marcus considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Some days are okay. Some days are really hard. I have nightmares sometimes. I get scared when people raise their voices, even if they're not angry. I'm working on it with my therapist. She says it'll get better. But it takes time." "That sounds very mature of you." "I don't feel mature. I feel kind of broken. But also kind of free. Is that weird?" "No," Elena said. "That makes perfect sense. You were carrying something too heavy for anyone to carry, especially a child. Now you're not carrying it anymore. Of course, that feels like freedom." They talked for a few more minutes about school and assignments, and his reintegration plan. Then Marcus gathered his things and headed for the door. He paused there, turned back. "Mrs. Hartfield, I'm going to be okay, I think. Maybe not right away, but eventually, and part of that is because you cared enough to look." After he left, Elena sat alone in her classroom for a long time. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes floating in golden light. The desks sat in their neat rows. A forgotten pencil lay on the floor. Everything looked exactly as it always did, as if the world hadn't shifted fundamentally in this space. But it had, and Elena understood now with crystalline clarity what teaching really meant. It wasn't just about lesson plans and test scores and curriculum standards. It was about seeing students, truly seeing them, even when they tried to hide, even when noticing was uncomfortable or inconvenient or frightening. It was about looking closer. That evening, David found her at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. "Thinking about Marcus?" he asked. "Thinking about all of them. Every student I've ever taught. Every student I'll teach in the future. Wondering who else I might have missed. Wondering who else is sitting in my classroom right now, hiding pain. Waiting for someone to notice. You can't save everyone, Elena. No, but I can pay attention. I can trust my instincts. I can refuse to look away when something feels wrong." She looked up at him. "That has to be enough, because it's all I have." David squeezed her shoulder in silent support. The school year continued its forward march. Winter became spring. Spring became early summer. Marcus remained in Elena's class, gradually relaxing, gradually allowing himself to be a child again. His grades improved, his friendships deepened. He tried out for the basketball team and made it. He participated in the science fair, he told jokes, he complained about homework. He was, in most visible ways, a normal 11-year-old boy. But Elena knew the work of healing continued beneath the surface. She knew he still had therapy twice a week. She knew he still struggled with trust and anger and fear. She knew his mother was navigating her own guilt and grief while trying to rebuild a safe life for both of them. The road was long, and there would be setbacks and struggles ahead. But he was traveling that road. He was alive and safe and moving forward, and that was everything. On the last day of school, Elena watched her students file out for the final time, already nosier and more confident than they'd been in September. Marcus lingered as she'd somehow known he would. "Have a good summer," she said. "Stay in touch if you want to." "I will. And Mrs. Hartfield, I wrote something for you, for the school newspaper, actually, but I wanted you to read it first." He handed her a folded piece of paper. Elena unfolded it carefully and read, "Sometimes the bravest thing an adult can do is pay attention. My teacher did that. She noticed small things that other people missed. She asked questions when it would have been easier to assume everything was fine. She didn't look away, even when looking was hard. Because of her, I'm safe now. Because of her, I'm healing. Because of her, I learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's courage. And because of her, I know that somewhere in the world, there are adults who will fight to protect kids, even when those kids have learned to hide their pain. Thank you, Mrs. Hartfield. You saved my life." Elena read it twice, then looked up to find Marcus watching her with quiet intensity. "Can I hug you?" she asked. He nodded, and she embraced him carefully, mindfully. "The way you hold something precious and fragile and impossibly strong all at once. You saved your own life," she whispered, "by surviving, by enduring, by being brave enough to accept help when it came. I just noticed. That's all." "That's everything," Marcus said. After he left, Elena sat at her desk and looked around the empty classroom. Tomorrow she'd pack up for summer. Tomorrow she'd file away lesson plans and grade books and prepare for next year. Tomorrow she'd think about new students and new challenges and the endless cycle of beginnings and endings that defined teaching. But today, she simply sat in the quiet and acknowledged what had happened here. A child had been saved. A life had been redirected. The system had worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it had worked. And it had started with one person refusing to look away. Elena pulled out her notebook, the one where she'd documented her observations about Marcus all those months ago. She flipped to a blank page and wrote, "Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, investigate. When you notice patterns, document them. When children need help, provide it. Even when it's scary, even when you might be wrong, even when every voice in your head says to leave well enough alone. Because somewhere, right now, there's a child hoping someone will notice. Be the person who notices. Be the person who acts. Be the person who looks closer. She closed the notebook and smiled. Outside, the afternoon stretched toward evening, golden and warm and full of possibility. Children played in yards. Parents came home from work. The world continued its rotation. Indifferent to individual dramas, but also infinitely capable of redemption, of healing, of second chances. Elena gathered her things and headed for the door. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own opportunities to see or not see, to act or stay silent. But tonight, she would go home to David and celebrate a small victory in the endless war against cruelty and neglect. Tonight, she would remember that teaching, real teaching, was about so much more than academics. It was about bearing witness. It was about protecting the vulnerable. It was about refusing to accept that suffering was inevitable, or pain was private, or children were anything less than sacred. Sometimes the bravest thing an adult could do was look closer, and Eleanor Hartfield had looked. If this story moved you or made you think differently about the small signs we might overlook every day, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below telling us your thoughts. We read every single one. And if you want more true stories that matter, stories that challenge us to be better and do better, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These stories need to be told, these voices need to be heard, and together we can create a world where every child has someone willing to look closer, to ask questions, to refuse to turn away when everything inside says it would be easier to pretend everything is fine. Thank you for watching, thank you for caring, and thank you for being the kind of person who pays attention.